This is Leader Time by FedNet, your podcast source for remarks by Senate Majority Leader John Thune and Democratic Leader Chuck Schumer on the Senate floor. On April 14, Thune returned to the Save America Act, which dominated floor time in March. The following material is protected by copyright.
Mr. President, we spent the weeks before Easter debating the Save America Act here in the Senate. And since the debate began, we've seen Democrats contort themselves every which way to justify opposing the common sense policies in this bill. On no issue is that more evident than voter ID. Mr. President, polls show that 80% of Americans support voter ID. Majorities of Americans in both parties support this common sense requirement. But among Democrats here in the Senate, it's a different story. Sure, Democrats have spent the last few weeks claiming that they support voter ID. But when it came time to vote on a reasonable, standalone voter ID proposal, every Democrat opposed it. That's right, Mr. President. Senate Democrats have been trying to rebrand themselves as supporters of voter ID. But when Republicans offered a straightforward voter ID proposal, every single Democrat in the Senate voted against it. Mr. President, I want to be clear about what Republicans put forward and what Democrats opposed. Senator Husted, someone who knows quite a bit about administering elections as the former two-term chief election official in the state of Ohio, offered a very simple voter ID amendment. The only thing it did requires a photo ID at the polls. A driver's license, tribal ID, military ID, veteran ID, passport, the types of IDs that are sitting in wallets right now and that the American people use on a regular basis. That's it. Supporting this amendment would not have obliged Democrats to support the underlying Save America Act. Democrats would have been free to vote for voter ID and then vote against the other common sense policies in the Save America Act. But Democrats couldn't bring themselves to vote even for standalone voter ID legislation. And it turns out that when Democrats say they support voter ID, they don't mean actual IDs. Mr. President, when Republicans and Americans, I would argue, talk about ID, we all mean the same thing. Something with a picture, an expiration date, something issued by a government. And to hear Democrats talk in the lead-up to the voter ID vote, you'd have thought that's exactly what they were talking about too. The senior senator from New Jersey went on CNN and said, and I quote, "We all want people who go to vote to show a valid ID," end quote. The Democrat whip said, and I quote again, "I'm not opposed to that. They ask you for an ID at the airport, don't they? That's reasonable," end quote. Yes, it is reasonable. The junior Democrat from New York said this, and again I quote, "The ideas that we have in our wallets should be good enough to vote," end quote. Well, Mr. President, that is exactly what we offered. Licenses, state ID cards, tribal IDs were all acceptable forms of ID in our proposal. The same kinds of ID that we have in our wallets right now. Mr. President, multiple Democrat senators even acknowledge that their own states have voter ID requirements and that they work. The junior senator from Georgia came to the floor and said this, and I quote again, "I think you should have to prove that you are who you say you are before you vote. I support voter ID. We have voter ID laws in my state. You should have to prove that you are who you say you are before you vote." End quote. I couldn't have said it better myself. And the Democrat leader said, and I quote, "Our objection as Democrats is not to a photo ID," end quote. Except as Democrats' recent vote demonstrates, that's not actually true. Before the vote, the Democrat leader spoke on the floor and made it clear that when he says he supports voter ID, he means that he supports voter ID as long as the ID requirements in question are essentially meaningless. And he's not the only one. To quote a recent news story, the junior senator from Colorado said, and I quote, "He supports voter ID, but signaled he will vote no when informed that the bill does not allow voters to use a utility bill to prove identity," end quote. He voted no because you can't show a utility bill as a form of ID. Mr. President, you can't make this stuff up. The senator from Colorado used to own a brewery in Denver. And I have to wonder whether you could show a utility bill to buy a beer there. I doubt it. But this is what Democrats think is good enough for our elections. The Democrat leader has said that voter ID requirements need to be, quote, inclusive and, quote, flexible. And he referenced a bill Democrats put forward a few years ago that included the sort of ID requirements that he says Democrats support. Well, let me read a few of the so-called IDs that that bill would have found acceptable for voters. A debit card, a utility bill, an expired fishing license, any document containing an individual's name, just their name, from any government. And of course, a photocopy of any of those would have been fine too. If this ID list were any more inclusive, Mr. President, my Jones County High School basketball jersey would have counted. Mr. President, in any other circumstance, requiring an ID means requiring an actual ID. You can't board a plane by showing a photocopy of your debit card. You can't do an early pickup at your daughter's school by showing a copy of your electric bill. Mr. President, Republicans believe that we should apply the same standard to voting. The American people are presenting their photo IDs on a regular basis and having a pretty easy go of it. We don't think it's too much to ask for the same when they go to vote. Mr. President, ask anyone on the street for their ID. Chances are they're going to pull out their driver's license, not their water bill. The American people know what an ID is. I guess we're still waiting for Democrats here in the Senate to figure it out.
For his part, Schumer criticized prosecution of the Iran war and Republican plans to fund immigration priorities through budget reconciliation.
Mr. President, just days ago, Donald Trump declared his war in Iran a, quote, total and complete victory, 100%, no question about it. Again, Donald Trump saying about his war, a total and complete victory, 100%, no question about it. But for the American people, for our troops, for our allies, for our economy, there is nothing but questions about it. In fact, to a majority of Americans, it's a total disaster. In just about every way, things are worse today than they were before Trump started his war of choice. The Straits of Hormuz, worse, closed, unstable. The Iranian regime, worse, more entrenched, more radical. Gas prices, worse, over $4 a gallon. Iran's nuclear ambitions, worse, they're still intact. And America's standing in the world, worse, as the Europeans and our Asian, Middle Eastern allies and so many others are very exasperated with Donald Trump and this country right now. So, Strait of Hormuz, worse. Iranian regime change, worse. Gas prices, worse. Iran's nuclear ambition, worse. American credibility, worse. Everything has been made worse by Donald Trump's war of choice. Donald Trump promised total and complete victory. Instead, he delivered total and complete chaos. That's not victory, that's failure. Donald Trump hasn't even clearly articulated what victory would look like, let alone achieve it. Instead, he has lurched from one reckless idea to the next, with no strategy, no endgame, no coalition of allies. And the consequences, unfortunately, are piling up. Russia's oil revenues are surging, buoyed by Donald Trump's decision to ease pressure and destabilize global markets. An adversary that is fueling the war in Ukraine is now benefiting from this chaos. And at home, Americans are paying a very high price. Inflation is rising again, driven in part by the spike in energy costs. So Americans are paying the price there. Mortgage rates are climbing. Consumer confidence has hit record lows. Donald Trump is leading our troops into a literal minefield abroad and leading American families into an economic minefield here at home. So let's call Trump's Iran policy for what it is. Not Operation Epic Fury, Operation Epic Failure. Operation Epic Failure is a much more appropriate name for Trump's war of choice. And 45 days into this war, Congress has been sidelined because our Republican colleagues refuse to take a strong stand against this war and duck it completely because they're afraid of Trump. No hearings, no oversight, no serious oversight, no accountability, not one. I say to my Republican friends, this is not how democracy conducts a war. That is not what the Constitution allows. So if Republicans refuse to do their job, Senate Democrats will force the issue. Under the War Powers Act, we will bring a resolution to the floor this week, led by Senator Tammy Duckworth, a combat veteran who understands the true cost of war far more than Donald Trump ever has. And we will not stop there. If Republicans block it, we will vote again and again and again, every single week, until Operation Epic Failure ends or Congress does its job and authorizes it, which I know it won't, given how bad this war is. Because our troops deserve a mission, not a mess. They deserve a strategy, not chaos. And they deserve leaders who understand that sending Americans into harm's way is a most serious decision a nation can make. Our Republican colleagues face a simple choice: stand with Americans or stand with Trump's failed war. Stand with our troops or keep them in harm's way without a plan. Stand with the American people or keep asking them to pay more for gas, more for groceries, and more for a war that has made everything worse. We will keep forcing that choice. We will keep forcing that choice, my Republican colleagues. You won't be able to keep ducking it. I'd like to thank Senator Kaine for his tremendous leadership on this issue. I'd like to thank Senator Booker and the members of our caucus for working with me to ensure we have these votes week after week, unrelenting, until Republicans are ready to stand up listen to the pleas of Americans, and do their job. Now, on DHS and Department of Homeland Security and Reconciliation. And like Trump's disasters abroad, Republicans are ignoring their disasters domestically as well. Instead of ending Trump's disastrous war in Iran and addressing the affordability crisis that is crushing working families across the country, Republicans continue to sow chaos here at home by keeping the Department of Homeland Security in a state of shutdown. Democrats put forward common sense, bipartisan reforms to rein in ICE and Border Patrol's lawless activity. Reforms, I might add, that most Americans support and that local police departments across the country practice every single day. To be clear, Republicans could open DHS if they wanted to. We also passed twice a bill that would easily fund all of DHS aside from ICE and CBP. But no, House Republicans would rather bog down the Senate in a partisan clown show with their reconciliation proposal. Why? To placate Stephen Miller and an unelected ideologue that has built a career rooted in cruelty. So let's be clear what Republicans have chosen. Not a clean funding bill with common sense reforms, not bipartisan solutions, because they can't support these things. Instead, they fight them because Trump and Stephen Miller force them to be opposed to the common sense proposals we have made that most Americans support. The Republicans here in the Senate and the House have chosen chaos. They're dragging the Senate through a painful, arduous, and partisan reconciliation process, not because it's the best path, but because they cannot and will not rein in ICE and Border Patrol or stop the violence. They want less accountability, not more, because Donald Trump and Stephen Miller told them so. That is disgraceful, dysfunctional, a disservice to the American people. Americans want ICE and Border Patrol reined in. They do not want to see the Senate give ICE and CBP a blank check so that these rogue agencies can continue to act with impunity, unleashing violence and disorder on our streets. They do not want to see an extremist like Stephen Miller calling the shots on American immigration policy. Instead of listening to Americans, Republicans in the House and Senate are obeying their orders from Trump and Stephen Miller. On the SAVE Act and election interference, perhaps it's unsurprising that an administration and a party that is so out of touch with the American electorate and so fearful of a November washout would go to such great lengths to rig the rules in their favor. But that's exactly what Donald Trump and the GOP are doing. Yesterday, the Brennan Center reported that more than half of local elected officials are concerned that political leaders will interfere in their work. We all go to the polls. We see these election workers. They're dedicated. It's an act of patriotism when they sit by the polls and count the votes and administer the election fairly. But Donald Trump and the GOP threaten them. I would be worried, too, based on what we're seeing from Donald Trump's party, if I were an election official. Apparently, the GOP has given up on trying to win over the electorate by delivering results, so they're instead trying to change the electorate with their SAVE Act. It would kill online, mail, and motor registration, forcing Americans to drive, sometime hours, to register in person. That's hard and costly in the best of times, but especially when gas is $4 a gallon. It would purge millions of Americans from the voter rolls. It would make it harder for married women to vote, and it would reject the most common form of IDs Americans use to register. The only thing Republicans are trying to save with this legislation is their own skin in the next election. The only thing they're trying to save is their own skin, because they know they're going down to defeat electorally. If the GOP spent the same time and energy trying to deliver for working families as it does trying to rig the rules, maybe Republicans would have a chance. But that's not what they're doing. And we're going to do everything we can to stop this evil act from ever becoming law. I yield the floor.
Thanks for listening. This program is copyrighted by Federal Network, Incorporated, and provided only for informational and educational purposes. Unauthorized reproduction, distribution, or use of this episode without expressed written permission from FedNet is prohibited.